Welcome to another vintage fishing tackle video. This one is going to be about the servicing of a Berkley 308, which was known as the Fish and Fold. This is the Fish and Fold 2. We'll be talking a little bit more about that, but before we get into that, I wanted to review sort of what led up to this. This was certainly inspired by other quote-unquote as seen on TV portable fishing outfits, probably the most famous of which was from the early 70s and beyond, Ron Popeil's Pocket Fisherman. And this one's in the box. The box is not in particularly good shape. It has a bonus pack of caviar natural bait, and they sold a separate accessory, which was kind of dumb and worthless in my opinion. It was basically just a little device where you would pack this material, this mixture of material, kind of almost like kind of reminded you of a dough ball, into the end of this device, and then it had a little slide lever, and it basically push it out into a pellet. Didn't stay on the hook very well, and just kind of a goofy little thing. But the outfit itself, I think, is kind of neat, and you can see the instructions here and how to use it, and then the reel or the outfit itself. Here's the outfit itself, and basically the reel is inside this housing, and my understanding is that the reels were either, some of them may have been Zebco's. Doesn't really look like much of a reel. It's just the innards of the reel and the spinner head and so on. But some of them were Zebco and some of them were Johnson. That's my understanding. And there were later versions of this that were dark green and so on. But I think this one dates to 1972. And this one was advertised on TV a lot. And do yourself a favor if you're interested in this old stuff, and go on YouTube and search Pocket Fisherman commercials and watch those old commercials. They're really entertaining. But basically you'd fold out the quote-unquote rod, and that would lock into place, and then you would have your push button to release the line, and you could lock this handle into place. This handle sort of folded, and you'd wind it in just sort of like a regular fishing reel. It would click and wind in just like a regular fishing reel. And of course it advertised that it had its own little miniature tackle box. You could open up this thing here and you could put your hooks and sinkers and a little bobber in there, hold that in there, and then it had this little feature here where you could clip it on your belt, and you could go out and fish, and when you were done you just push this little button here and fold that back in place, and you could release the handle and fold that down and stick that in your glove compartment and store it there until you saw another fishing hole sometime and go fishing again. So neat little thing. I fished with them, and they work just fine for small pan fishing stuff. Kind of takes some getting used to in terms of casting them, because there's not a long rod at the end. It turns out that a side cast is more effective than an overhead type cast. So that's probably what started the whole quote-unquote as seen on TV fishing, portable fishing outfits. And then a very well-known and well-respected manufacturer, St. Croix, came up with a version of a portable fishing outfit, and that's the St. Croix Fishing Machine. And this one, quite frankly, is really more of a user-friendly, usable, functional fishing rod for even bigger fish. I've used this one, it works fine. And it's got a regular reel sort of obviously built into the handle. And what makes it portable is that it's telescopic. So these things come out all the way out into a regular length rod. Now in this particular one, I got it cheap at a flea market, and one of the rods was coming out. So you'd pull it out, and one of the sections was pulling out. It had lost, it had worn off, and it wasn't. It was popping out, and it's not supposed to. You're supposed to just stretch it out till it's tight. And so what I had to do on this to fix that was to take and very carefully heat these eyes and pop them off, and just dissect the whole thing and pull that whole apparatus out. And then I build up the fat end that had worn with epoxy and sanded that until I could pull it out without the rod popping all the way out, without that segment of rod popping all the way out. It's got essentially what's kind of like a star drag. It's not really star shaped, but you adjust the drag here at the base of the handle. And then it had another kind of neat feature in that it's got this range finder. So if you made a particularly good cast, maybe you're trying to get your bobber or your lure right at the edge of some lily pads or something, and you're stationary in a boat or you're on the shore, and you want to cast only that distance. You don't want to get up in the weeds or whatever. You can push this on, and it shoves a little rod up in there so that when you wind in, that rod holds just that same amount of line and will stop after that certain amount of line is comes out. And very similar, it's essentially the same thing as the little plastic pegs you put in the little plastic ice fishing reel. Once you get your depth set, you plug that little peg in there, and then when you let out line, it always stops at that peg. And that's basically what this range finder does. So that's kind of a neat option. That's really a decent functioning portable fishing combo. Nothing wrong with that. I've hauled in fair sized bass with that. So that was 1976 that was introduced. So sometime after the Popeil Pocket Fisherman. And then we'll skip ahead a little bit before we get into the one that came after the fishing machine and go into the 1990s, where the Flying Lure Company came out with what is called the Instant Fisherman. And this one would fold out and clip into place. And then you could adjust, and of course it had this these telescopic things here, so you'd pull that out. And then you could further adjust the length of the rod by unscrewing this here and sliding it out even farther. So you could adjust the length of the rod about 6 inches or so one way or the other. And on this one, the line threads through here and into the eyelets from underneath. So you got to thread the line through that hole there and into the eyelets. And it's again a push button mechanism. This one, here's the handle. There's how you lock the handle into place. And someday maybe I'll do a video fishing with all of these things. But this one does have a star drag. And again, these came out in this particular one, I think there's a black one as well. But this, and I don't remember which one was first, but this green one I think came out about 1996. But before that and after the fishing machine, in about 1977, that's when the patent was official, was the Berkley Fish and Fold. This is the Fish and Fold 2. There were a couple versions, and mainly the difference was different reels. But this reel is actually a Johnson 088A reel. And so I think these came out right around, maybe just around the time that the fishing machine came out. And it's kind of a hybrid between the Pocket Fisherman by Popeil and the fishing machine, in that it's got this basically a short plastic rod on it that folds out just like the Pocket Fisherman, and then you click that into place and that holds it, and then when you want to fold it, you click it back out and fold it, and then you push this in the rest of the way, and then that locks it in. Well, I guess it doesn't lock it in. Oh yeah, you click it in down there. There's a little tab there and it clicks in, so that kind of locks it in. So that was kind of similar to the Pocket Fisherman. What's most like the fishing machine is it actually has a regular exterior reel on it. And this one is, I presume, we're going to get into it. I've never been into one. I didn't even know these existed until a few days ago. I thought I had all the quote-unquote as seen on TV portable combos, and I found this one, was very excited to get it because I think these are nifty little gadgets. But I presume that once we take out these screws, this reel is entirely removable and then, of course, serviceable. So I love these old 70s as seen on TV fishing gadgets, including things like this, which looks like a prop from a 1950s UFO movie. It's a bobber produced in 1973 called the Sure Set bobber. That and it has, and basically what it does is it sets the hook for you. When a fish tugs on this here on your line, it automatically retracts and sets the hook. And there are two settings, one light setting for small fish and one heavier setting for bigger fish. These came in a clear plastic box, and just really, I haven't tried this yet. I'd rather set the hook myself, but I'm going to try that. I think that's kind of cool. So that's sort of the introduction as to why I was, because I like collecting these TV portable fishing gadgets and so on. And when I found that, I thought, oh, you know, I can add another one. And so that's what led to this video on servicing the Berkley 308 Fold and Fish 2. This is the Fold and Fish 2. Of course, if I was really seriously fishing and wanted a portable outfit, you know, nowadays you can buy rods that are telescopic and you can put whatever reel you want on them. So this is a ultralight Shakespeare rod that's telescopic. And then I've got this really nifty, I really like these Zebco bullets. This is a ultralight Zebco bullet 22 underspin. So you hold it like a spinning reel and you release the line with this trigger here. And so that, you know, if I was really serious about having a portable outfit in my glove box, I might be more inclined to go with that. It's still a relatively vintage reel. I think, what, 90s on that one? I'd have to check. But these are still cool, these vintage ones. So let's get into this. Okay, so the first thing that I think needs to happen is that we need to remove these screws and get the reel off of there. So in most of these videos, I'm going through these for the first time myself, so it won't be surprising if there are things that I don't know and have to figure out. And so if I make mistakes, then that will, if you watch this before you dig into yours, you can learn from my mistakes before you make a mistake. I'm almost positive this is the first time this thing has ever been apart. It probably wasn't hardly used. It still has the decal on it that says factory. It says factory filled with patented Berkley Trilene XL 8-pound test. So I'm not gonna mess with that much anymore for right now. I'm just gonna set that aside with its bolts and just focus on the reel for now. Of course, clean that rest of that up, but it's basically just a little, and it's not moving. I mean, it isn't even moving in the slightest. So it must be really old, gummed up grease. So I'm going to start disassembling this and put everything into the parts pile. Last video I did, I used pliers to get some of this stuff off, and people were probably cringing, and it's probably for good reason. No sense scarring all this stuff up, especially if it's kind of a collector's piece. But we'll take off this nut on the spinner head. This is going to be a simple reel, similar to, entry grade Zebco or something like that. So not as complicated as that Johnson 115 I went through in the previous video. Okay, and so question is, does that spool? Yes, the spool does come out. It's all plastic. I would not at all be surprised if that's the original Berkley Trilene factory loaded line. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and remove that, as I always do. You can never trust old line. You have no idea how long it's been on there, what kind of decay it's experienced. Might as well put some new line on. It's not my opinion, unless it's got, factory tape on there and this and that. You're just going to put it on a shelf. I don't think it affects the value at all to remove that old line and put on some new. This has obviously been tied to something and fished. So get that line off, and I'll be back in 3, 2, 1, and just like that, the old line is off the spool. That can go into the parts tray. Now we'll go ahead and get this crank handle off. And the star drag adjustment. Remembering that this little tension washer here, the concave side faces out. And now on to the side plate. And out comes the thumb. And there it is. Simple, simple, simple. That's turning. You can see the anti-reverse pawl there, whatever you want to call it. You've got a bushing that goes in there. Examine that and make sure that it's pretty much the same on both ends, so you know whether it needs to go in a special way. And then we really probably need to get this anti-reverse gear off so we can access that. You might want to remember again, take photos. before you disassemble, so you know how things go back on. But you want to pay attention to the orientation of those teeth on that gear, so you put it back on the correct way. It will be relative. You've had some experience with this. It'll be relatively self-explanatory. I wonder if that drag ring is adhered to that from the factory, or if that's, oh, here it comes. I think that's supposed to separate ultimately. And I do not really like to grease or oil these drag rings or drag washers. And my thought is that these are based on friction, and it just doesn't make sense to grease and oil those all up. So that washer will be cleaned of any grease and left dry when it goes back in. There may be others that disagree or have other ideas on that, but that's sort of my thought on that. I'm guessing this is where it's all gummed up, because I can't move that. I can't move that pinion shaft. I can with the pliers. The question is, will I be able to punch that out of there and get it out without having to take off the spring and all that? Will I be able to winkle that out of there? I think I can. I think it'll go back through the slot for the button and allow me to get it out of there. Yeah. And then I should be able to winkle that thing out of there. Let's hope. Without having to dismantle all that. There. So that's all there is to it. There's a lot of really, really sticky grease on there. And again, when I look at that, you just can't, I mean, that's so stuck in there. You can't push the pinion gear up against the spring. It's just, you'd have never been able to push that button without breaking it. So we got to get some penetrant in there and loosen that up and clean this really good. But that's, and then what's holding this on? Is that a C-clip or something on there? I may not want to mess with that. I'm thinking that's riveted in, so I'm just going to lubricate that good, and that piece won't come off. But that is all the pieces to it. And so I'm going to head to the sink, and I'm going to clean that reel up, and I'm going to clean the rod. And I'm not going to show that part. I showed it in the Johnson Century 115 video just so people could see how thoroughly I prefer to wash the parts. The idea being that you want to get them as clean as possible and rinse them. So you may be using water as a solvent, you may be using dish soap as a solvent, and you may occasionally need WD-40 as a solvent to get all that stuff off. But it's, you know, I don't want to just, you know, do that with a Q-tip. I want it to be rinsed in the sink in case there's any sand or anything in there that might get in the gears. That all needs to be rinsed out and thoroughly cleaned like new. So, and I also, it's very important when you start talking about the shafts for the various gears, for the pinion gear, for the crank gear, the main gear, you know, if you're going to clean all the grease off of this, that's one thing that makes it run smooth. Make sure you clean it out of the journal that the thing went in, because if at least half the grease is going to be in there and half on here, so if you clean that only and you don't clean that out, well, you're not just doing a good of a job, and it's not going to work as smoothly as it could. So I'm going to go to the sink and clean all those parts, and when I come back, we will lube and reassemble. Okay, so all of the parts have been thoroughly cleaned and dried, and now it's time to reassemble. One thing I did notice is on this, and by the way, you want to make sure even after you do that thorough washing, because sometimes there's still grease in those teeth, and it's particularly the case with the Pinion Gear. This isn't the Pinion Gear, obviously, but I don't know if you can see that, but there is still gunk in there that despite thorough scrubbing with a toothbrush, with solvent, there's still grease in every one of those teeth. Hard grease that's going to negatively affect their performance. So I always make sure to check those even after scrubbing and just go through them with a real tiny flat blade screwdriver or similar sharper object that you can get down in and get that gunk out of there. One thing I was noticing, and I highly doubt that anybody's ever been into this reel. I bet it wasn't fished more than a couple of times, but typically you have, so in this case you had a drag washer, one of these, I don't know what kind of material they're made of. You'd have a drag washer there on that side, and you typically have one between that shaft and the drive gear, and this one doesn't have one. So maybe this one just didn't call for one there, or maybe whoever put it together in the factory forgot to put one there. There's a remote possibility somebody tried to service this years ago and forgot. I don't know. I doubt it. So then when you put that together and that turns, yeah, that catches. You want to make sure that that little pawl catches on the gears of that anti-reverse. So one thing too I need to make sure to do is to get that bushing back in there. And then also oil. Again, I do not really like to put grease on these various shafts. Many reel instructions and maintenance manuals will also indicate that it's best to oil those rather than grease. I usually restrict my grease mainly to the spool, the inside ring of the spool, into the gears themselves, and use oil pretty much everywhere else. I think we can go. Oh, we've got to put this little piece here on, and that is concave side out, and then we can put on our star drag adjuster here to hold that whole apparatus in place. Now that's turning real nice, and the anti-reverse is working as it should. That little pawl appears to work purely on gravity, and the gravity keeps it down, and so when you try to wind and reverse it, it stops it. Okay, now the other thing, we got to double check this. I went through this and washed it, and even went through it with the screwdriver in the sink. And there's still this pinion gear. There's still just a little bit of grease up in the very end of these teeth here. And also on a lot of times on these, where is it? There might be some residual grease or corrosion or something. I'll take a piece of steel wool and just shine up that pinion gear shaft. And so, if we can winkle this thing back into there, I'm going to go ahead and add some oil to it. And see if I can winkle that thing back in there in the same way that I got it out. And I can. Now that turns real nice in there. This reel's going to work fine now. I think we can go ahead and add the spool back on. Make sure there's not any parts I'm forgetting. Again, you can grease this shaft where the spool goes over. You can put a little grease on there if you want. And put that in place. And then this had a little grease on this spring here. This isn't your typical like line pickup guide or anything. I really don't see any need to put anything on there. It's just not a standard moving part. It's just a spring, so I'm not going to put anything there. Now we want to lube or grease the pinion gear. And the main gear. And there's a little notch there. By the way, this side plate is metal, and the cover is metal. The rest of this frame and so on is plastic. So now we can start thinking about getting our button in there and lining it up with where that the screw ends up being the shaft that holds that in place. That holds the button in place. And there she goes, working like a charm. Oh, I don't have my drag set quite enough yet. That's the problem. There. So I'll shine that up on the outside a little bit before I take the final photo. But in the meantime, I'm going to take the rod over to the sink and get that all cleaned up, put back together, and we'll take a peek at it when it's all reassembled. Okay, we got the rod all cleaned up, and one thing I want to do before I put that back together is this little shaft around which the rod hinges, is just to get a little grease on that to make that rod fold in and out smoothly. I guess when you click that in, then it becomes a lot more stable. Before you click that in, there's a lot of play this way. When you click that in, it's now stable, or at least more stable. Pull that out, and then you can lock it into place down here. And there's your portable Berkley 308 Fish and Fold 2 fishing combo. I suspect it takes me about a minimum of a half hour on a simple reel like this, and maybe an average of 45 minutes, and then if it's a complicated reel it can get to be much longer. But it's very gratifying to bring them back to life and get them working again, and quite frankly with fishing with them. I mean, I actually like going out and fishing with I have a whole wall full of modern fishing equipment, fancy expensive stuff, but I found that lately I prefer just fishing with the vintage stuff, and sometimes with these gadgets, just for fun. All right, I will see you next time.